vegetable farmers and their weed control machines. In this video, we visit 9 vegetable farms in 3 New England states to talk with growers about their weed control equipment and how it's used. They will describe a variety of cultivation tools and approaches to weed control. Hopefully, their knowledge and experience will help you get a better understanding of cultivation equipment and techniques. Matching cultivation tools to the soils, crops, weeds, and other particulars of a farm can be a complex task. Growers that are trying to reduce or eliminate their reliance on herbicides need information that will help them make good decisions about cultivation and weed control. Extension, research, and the private sector working together can generate that kind of information. Funded in part by the USDA Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program, promoting environmentally sound and economically viable agriculture. This video was produced by Vern Grubinger, University of Vermont Extension System, and Mary Jane Else, University of Massachusetts Agroecology Program.
Well, my name is Bob Gray, and my wife Kim and I farm here in South Newbury, Vermont. We run a roadside sales operation. We have approximately 30 acres under cultivation. Try to grow a wide variety of vegetables, and we have a pick-your-own strawberry operation and a wholesale strawberry operation. I would say that strawberries are about a third of our crop. Well, a third of our income anyway, and mixed vegetables sold in our retail stand are the other 2/3. I'm here today to show you some of our cultivation techniques. We feel very strongly that any weed's a bad weed. I don't like to see any weeds in the field. That doesn't always happen. We use herbicides. Probably our biggest crop for herbicides is corn. We think corn is a good crop to clean a field with. If we get a field that's really has a lot of weed seeds in it, we can put corn and go with herbicide, and it doesn't get rid of all the weed seeds, but it certainly, lowers the pressure. This machine we're using now is something we modified from we got it in Canada. It's a Canadian field cultivator, they call it, and we use it basically just for weed control. And we had to modify it from a larger size. Actually, these were wings that came from a 14-foot model or something, and someone had sold the 8-foot center portions, and this was the outside wings. We welded together and made it so it would fit between the rows of plastic. When we lay down our plastic, we always try to put the plastic just a tractor width or a little more apart. And we use a lot of space between our plastic, and that's mainly just for weed control, because we found that when you had to do it by hand, with a hoe or a hand-push cultivator, it just never got done. But if we can jump on a tractor, then we can easily do, 3 or 4 or 5 acres in an afternoon, or do, 10 lengths of plastic in a half an hour. And the advantage of this field cultivator over a tiller, we used to take the tiller and crank it up so it was really shallow and just cuff the top 2 inches of soil. It worked very well, but it was slow. The beauty of this piece of equipment here is that you can adjust the depth. And so we can use it as a primary tillage tool to loosen the soil and go 6 to 8 inches deep, if that's what we want to do. But when we're controlling weeds, we just want to skim the surface of the soil, the top 2 inches. And so with this adjusting wheel here, we can raise these tines up or down so they just barely skim, because we don't want to bring up more soil. We want to just sterilize the soil, the top 2 inches of soil, and kill those weeds that are in that zone. So this is just simply a spring-loaded, a spring shank cultivator tooth that vibrates and creates a little more tillage action. But the thing I like the best is this reel in the back, in that once you've broken the soil up, there's some clods of dirt like this that a weed is actually growing in. And by the time it gets through this thing rolling over, it breaks it apart and exposes the root, and it literally hangs the weed up to dry. As you can see, some of them hanging on the basket there. And that's the important thing. You get the soil off the bare root of the small weed, flip it over, and it lay it on top of the ground where the sun can bake it and kill it. We've been trying to figure out a system for the edges of plastic for as many years we've used plastic, and this is coming closer to what we want all the time. We used to use shovels, sweeps they call them, off a cultivator, but that would either go above the plastic and just skim along and not kill the weeds, or go below the plastic and loosen it up and not kill the weeds either. We find this, we can run right over the top of the plastic, and in fact, sometimes I think it even stretches the plastic tighter and makes the plastic better, because it'll roll over the top and push little holes in it and punch it down further in the soil. So this is zoned, if you understand, on the edge of the plastic, where the plastic curls down under where you secure it to the soil. That is always a weed problem, because you can't take a hoe. Even with a hoe, you end up tearing the plastic, whereas this thing seems to go over and flick the weeds off, if they're small. As I said, again, these weeds are too big. We had a problem here. We missed them the first time through. But under ideal conditions, if you time it right, it works quite well. This piece of equipment here actually came off a Lilliston cultivator. It's some of your larger Lilliston setups have what they call an inner wheel. It's a smaller spider wheel that runs very close to the plant. And we just took it and modified it with the same hookup to this cultivator setup here. We got an adjustment here so we can swivel it to get an angle. The more angle you get, the more action you get. And we think it works pretty well. I got some weeds here in front of me, and the time to get weeds is actually before you see them, or just when they're an inch or less tall, because the root system isn't very strong, and by just flicking the dirt, you can roll the soil over and get the weed exposed to the surface, where it'll die in a half an hour or less in the sun. You take a larger weed here, which is one we missed from the last cultivation. This weed has so much reserve moisture and nutrients in the stalk itself that it'll sacrifice that, and that weed there will not die in an hour in the sun. It may not die all day in the sun. So you've missed it. Once they get this big, you're in real trouble. It means handwork. So timing is everything, and we always have problems. If it rains 4 days in a row and it's warm and you can't cultivate anyway, then the weeds get away from you. And I guess that leads me to another point, is that we have lots of cultivators and lots of tractors, and I think you almost never have too many, because I like to have each cultivation piece of equipment on each tractor so I don't have to stop and adjust and mount up, because sometimes you don't have the time to do that. It'd be nice just to be able to jump from one tractor onto another one. And it's kind of extravagant, but you can usually find a used tractor that if you don't use it too heavily, will last for years. And just mount a certain piece of equipment on that tractor, get it set up perfectly, and leave it. This piece of equipment here is a Lilliston rolling tine cultivator, and it's a very versatile tillage tool because it adjusts so many ways and will do so many things. You can adjust it this way, like if you want to hill potatoes, you can crank it up pretty steep and it'll throw dirt up. You can adjust it back and forth, like if you see it this way for more action. If you want it to dig more and move more dirt, then you turn this backwards. You can slide it this way to get closer to the plant or further away from the plant. We like it a lot, use it on many, many crops. Right here on broccoli, we use it to actually throw dirt underneath the plant to bury weeds. We have the front sweeps on, and then we come along, which will move the dirt in under the plant, and this will actually throw dirt behind and throw it over the plant. And if you watch your timing, if the weeds aren't too big, you can keep this crop absolutely clean. I think I can get 99% of the weeds in this crop every time, as long as I'm there when I'm supposed to be there. I want to talk about these cultivator sweeps and what they do, but look here, I see something that reminds me of something very important. You should never let your cultivator sweeps rust, and I always do, because I seem too busy to clean them up, and they'll rust literally overnight because of the acidity of the soil or something. Once they rust, the dirt doesn't slide smoothly over the cultivator. It boils over. So it doesn't do nearly as nice a job of cultivating. You really want to slice just under the ground with a cultivator, an inch, half inch deep. Once you get dirt sticking to it, it begins to boil and roll, and it doesn't do nearly as nice a job. And that's just because it rusted and gets sticky. And by rights, they should be cleaned off every time you get through and oiled. And if you have rust on them, they should be sanded until they're really smooth. We have a problem here. We don't cultivate enough acreage at one time so that they get smoothed up. If you're cultivating 10 acres, by that time they'll finally get all shiny and smooth. But here the rust lasts from one time to another. We try to set these cultivator shanks, the sweeps they're called, so that they'll throw dirt underneath the plant and bury up any weeds. I mean, lots of times, I remember my dad used to say, there are two ways to kill a weed. You know, you can cut it off, you can bury it up. And I think sometimes burying up a weed is just as successful as actually digging it up. Because when you dig it up, it still has a root. If you cover it up, you smother it, and it's just not going to grow. So all you want to do is throw dirt over the weeds with your cultivator sweeps like this, see, and bury them up. And if you get them when they're an inch or so tall, it works very, very well. And so you're going to move these in or out so they do just what you want them to do. Speed is important. The Lilliston likes to go fast. That's the cultivator in the rear. And if you can go fast and not hit the plants with these, well, then it'll work even better because it'll throw the dirt more. Okay, this cultivation equipment here is called a budding in-row weeder. And the in-row comes from the fact that it literally will weed around the plant. If you can see my fingers here, the rubber fingers go like this around the plant and scrub the weeds out. And there's a little metal prongs in the bottom of the finger wheel there that spins the fingers. And on transplanted plants like strawberry or broccoli, or even actually fast-growing plants like beans, it does a beautiful job. Onions in a single row, anything that's can take a little bit of scrubbing without being pulled out. Today, this is just about the right time and timing to cultivate. The weeds are just coming through, and this thing here will just take them and actually flick them right out of the ground. If you let them get too big, it won't work. It has to be done when the weeds are an inch or less in height. Once you get past that stage, then you're screwed up. So we love it. It's it does an incredible job. It's like getting 15 people hoeing all at once, and you're doing all the work yourself. It's mounted on an Alice Chalmers G tractor. They don't make them anymore, but this was made in the 40s and early 50s. A little lightweight tractor with a motor in the rear. You can see perfectly what you're doing. It turns on a dime. For the adjustment, the actual adjustment on this budding weeder, it does all kinds of things. It goes in and out. It goes forward and back. These rear things can be turned around so they'll throw dirt in toward the plant, or reverse so they'll throw dirt away from the plant. Very, very versatile piece of equipment. One of the drawbacks is, you can see right here, it doesn't like wet soil, but you shouldn't be cultivating in the rain anyway, because the dirt will pack up underneath. So you have to get off once in a while and bang on it to shake the dirt off so it'll do what it's supposed to do. But in dry soil, sandy soil, it'll work in stones as long as there aren't too many of them. Generally with this machine you go fairly slow, maybe 2 to 3 miles per hour, depending on the crop and how strong it is. So we always have something in the front weeding around the plant, and then something in the back covering the wheel track. But it's more than that. With the other tractors that have the Lillistons on them, the Lilliston can actually do more work than just covering the wheel track. So the front cultivator, whatever it may be, a sweep or a shovel or fingers like this, works around the plant, and the Lilliston can come along and finish up or level out or throw more dirt or hill, depending on what you want to do. So we always try to figure out what we're trying to do and put a piece of equipment that'll, do the most we can, do the most good.
Hi, I'm John Arena from Arena Farms. We're located in Concord, Massachusetts. We grow 180 different varieties of fruits and vegetables on 200 acres of land. We currently are in the process of using a lot of machinery for cultivation purposes, sort of to get away from the use of herbicides, and with minimal hand weeding. We grow many varieties of beans and peas, all without herbicides. What we do is in that particular field, we try not to let weeds develop, go to seed. So we're constantly keeping that process of harrowing, cultivating, keeping those weeds from going to seed is a big part of our farm plan, our farm weed plan. That process is done by planting the rows. We plant them 3 feet apart. Leaving a hill of dirt on each side of the row helps us to, when cultivating, it fills in along the stem of the plant and covers any small weeds that might be germinating. And generally in the about 6 acres of beans and peas we grow, we can do all of that without any hand weeding and just cultivation. This tractor is set up with cultivating discs for doing along the edges of plastic without the use of herbicides and very minimal hand weeding. This is set up with a straight tooth right here. It's at a slight angle to get underneath the black plastic. It also kind of lifts it up a little bit, so any weeds that are germinating or small weeds that are there get, really get disturbed by that. Followed by a second round cultivating disc, which again throws dirt out and disturbs the weeds. And the last disc here returns the soil back onto the plastic edge where this first one kind of had taken it off a little bit. And this is our, all these tools here are simple cultivating tools, a straight tooth. It does have a spring if you have rocky fields. The tractor is a Super C farm all from International Harvester, and very simple operation. We generally use this machine when weeds are about just starting to germinate. That's the best time to go in. That slight disruption of the ground, when very small weeds, they die instantly. If you do get behind, however, and weeds start to germinate and they get even up to 6, we've even used this at 12 inches in height. Because the round discs are there, you get no clog up that you would normally get on all straight teeth. So it's great if you can get in early, and if you happen to not get in early, they still will do a great job. The only difference is you'd have to do, at weeds 6 to 12 inches in height, you may have to do your rows about 6 times to get a complete, clean area. Whereas if you get in at the right time, usually twice a year is all that you need to be done. This particular field has been done twice, and what offers us also with this unit is we can put down fertilizer at the same time that we're cultivating. So it's works out, we're getting a lot of things done with one pass. This cultivation system also works great on crabgrass. It gets down below the root system, lifts it out, and it does kill it. The purslane also, which generally is a problem weed for us, it does pull the weed out, and if you do it on a hot enough day, it generally will die before it has a chance to re-root itself in.
My name's Tim Taylor. I operate Crossroad Farm in Post Mills, Vermont, and I farm approximately 50 acres of mixed vegetables. We have greenhouse tomatoes. We grow approximately 16,000 pounds of those. Quite a big bedding plant business now, and in the field crops out here we grow just about everything. One time we even tried artichokes one year. We have, as far as weed strategies, I think probably the one I focus on the most is to keep my corn crop the cleanest I can. I use that as a way to come into my next fields, because in my operation it takes up a great deal of the acreage. I like to let no weeds go to seed there. So but we use no herbicide there. I want to stress that right from the start. We never have. I've always cultivated it. I use a single row cultivator. I use a 2-row cultivator, the rolling Lilliston type cultivators, and I use some blind cultivation with rotary hose. This is a rotary hoe, which we use in corn. It comes in all different lengths. This is actually a very small one. It's been cut down so it does 2 rows of corn. We use it for blind cultivation. After we've sowed the corn, approximately anywhere from 4 to 5 to, perhaps a week to 10 days later, depending upon the soil temperature and the time of the year, we'll come in and we just run this right across the top of the crop blindly. This is usually pre-emergent or just as it's spiking up. I use this in corn, I've used it in peas and in beans. It will get about approximately 50 to 60% of the weeds. It will get approximately, maybe 2 to 3% of the corn, or the crop you're trying to actually grow. Depending upon your timing, you can actually come in when the crop is not so much corn, but peas and beans, when the crop is actually up and starting to leaf out. It's one of the pros and the cons of this. It allows you a little more time for more finer cultivation because it does reduce the pressure, the weed pressure for a period of time, and yet it doesn't get them all, and you still need to do cultivation. I find I still need to do single row cultivation as well. Each sprocket here is spring loaded. It'll bear the full weight of the unit. You can get a little nervous sometimes when you use it because it does sink into the ground quite a ways. I find that I'm quite safe as long as I keep my corn planted at 2-inch level. Corn planted up a little in the 1-inch zone will tend to be dug up a little more often. And one of the problems with this tool is that it picks up all my loose plastic from my crops like melons and zucchini and squash. I don't know if it's exactly a downsize. It gets it out of the field, which I do want to get it out. The other primary cultivation tool I use is a slightly modern version of 2-inch shovels. We call these the Curbco batwings, and they're for single row cultivation, although I have seen them used in other applications in 2 and 3 and 4 row cultivation. What they consist of is a series of old car bumpers that have been fashioned into these batwings for throwing dirt. Some of the things I really like about it are if I have some very mature weeds and them come in quite late, it cuts under them and cuts them quite effectively and rips them up. It's quite effective where I do have some witchgrass because again it rips it up. Well, here we have the budding basket weeder, and what we do here is we plant all our lettuce is grown from, is transplanted. We do nothing from seed into the field. It's all transplanted and it's a 2-row bed system. And a week after transplanting approximately, we'll come in with the budding basket here, which is ground driven off of this chain here. And we can go approximately, just about as fast as you'd want to drive it on the open field, 5 miles an hour or so. Its advantage is that it won't throw dirt into the lettuce. It moves in this manner and kicks up the weed seeds, cultivating at about 1 inch, depending upon where I set it in the ground. Wait about a week because we get a little bit of germination, but we don't want to wait too long because we don't want the weeds to be too big. The advantage of the belly mount is that it does not wander. The cultivating tool doesn't wander in the field as it would behind the tractor if it was placed behind the tractor. I'm able to view straight down at the single row. I can't see both rows, but I can see one row, and I just can see exactly where I'm placing the tool. Absolutely exactly. If I daydream a little bit and it wanders off, I can catch it real quick, whereas when it's behind me, in the case of some of the 3-point hitch tools that I use for cultivation, it tends to wander a little more, and I tend not to have quite the same control that I would have. I wanted to stress this. I own 2 of these Kubotas, and this is mounted here all year long. I don't take this off. It's not difficult to mount. It just has 4 bolts here and 4 bolts on the other side, but I have it set just perfectly the way I want it, and I honestly believe you should have a tractor for each piece of cultivating equipment you have, because the downside on all cultivation is the setup time. What we do is the basket is spaced 6 inches apart, and I'll do 2 passes here. The first pass I'll be nursed right up next to the radishes down one side. I'll turn around, come back in the same bed up against the other side as close as I can go. In that way I get within usually 1 inch to 2 inches of the crop, even though I have 6-inch spacing on the basket. Here's the Perfecta field cultivator. This is something new for me that I'm just experimenting this year with. I hope it's going to be reduce my reliance upon a rotavator. in my field bed preparation. Normally what my present practice is to subsoil in the spring, put the subsoil on, a 2-shank subsoiler, run around the entire 30-40 acre farm subsoiling, and then gradually manure and rotivate and make beds as I need them. And then in the fall, once again, use the rotivator to incorporate the residue. And I have some concerns about soil structure, and I'm trying to look for alternatives to that, in especially the bed preparation in the spring, and also for witch grass control.
My name's Chuck Armstrong. I live in Brownsville, Vermont, and I grow about 30 acres of vegetables and cover crops. My main vegetable crops are sweet corn, green beans, winter squash, and peas. And I guess today we're talking about cultivation, and I start off my season by chisel plowing, and then I follow that up with harrowing and field cultivating with a Perfecta field cultivator. All the crops I plant are pretty large seeded, and I can use a Lely weeder on those. And so after I plant, I'll use the Lely weeder before the plant comes up, and also after. A good way to judge whether you need the Lely weed is to just run your hands through the soil, and if you see a lot of white thread seeds germinating, it kind of looks like a sprout salad, then you know you're ready to cultivate. When I'm using the machine on crops that haven't emerged yet, I usually dig up a short section of row to see what the crop is doing, how far along it is, whether it's how close it is to coming through the surface, and then I'll know how much pressure I want to put down on the tines. And the way I adjust the tines is by raising and lowering the whole machine. The lower you push it, the more pressure you're going to have on the tines. And as I start down the row, I'll get them all in the ground, and I'll put it down a little bit, and if I feel like I'm starting to pull some crop up, then I'll raise it a little bit, and you know, trying to keep it down hard enough that it's still pulling out the weeds. The other cultivation techniques I use are some Bezzerides weeders. I'll use the Bezzerides tools, and there's a torsion weeder that's you can get real close to the plant, and it has a springing action so that it will bend away from the plant, but it'll still kill the weeds, but it's less likely to kill the crop plant. And it has a very minimal amount of hilling, so you can do it when the crop is very small. And then there's another tool called a spring hoe that's similar action, but it gives a little bit more hilling action, so it's a little bit more aggressive, so you can come through that on the second time through. This is a toolbar cultivator. I use it on my corn, beans, and winter squash. I try to use this as soon as I can after the crop is up, and just big enough for me to get in there. These are called spiders, and they're a Bezzerides tool, and I've got them set up now so that they're taking soil away from the crop, and you can reverse it so that you can hill up the crop. And supposedly it's a little bit more or less aggressive according to which way you point these tines. They have a little bit of a curve to them. If you point them forward, they're supposed to be a little bit more aggressive. And I point them to take soil away from the crop when it's small, and so that the last tool that comes through, which is this, won't have very much soil that it pushes against the crop, and so it won't bury it. And I've got I've got one on each side of the crop, and they go just under the soil like that, and I've got them so that the distance is it's about 3.5 inches apart, and You use it really similar to a shovel, but it's a little bit more forgiving because it doesn't have a sharp edge here, so it's less likely to cut your crop, and it will flex as it's in the soil. It will flex around a little bit, so you can get it a little bit closer than you probably could at a regular sharp shovel. And in between, that's what I have for the last tool, and in between I have some side knives, and it's just to, I find that if I just had the spiders and these, I was missing some spots, so I just put that in there to sort of clean it up, and it sort of also levels back out whatever kind of a hilling action that this tool makes.
Okay, my name is Pooh Sprague. My wife Ann and I own Edgewater Farm here in Plainfield, New Hampshire. Our bent on weeding is that we're trying to be somewhat biodynamic, trying to remove ourselves from the use of pesticides. It's not a religion with us. What we feel about land stewardship as a profitable farm is the most important thing. So cultivators are important to our regime, but if I have to use a chemical, I've got them on stock. They're part of the total program that we use. This is the Lely weeder that we acquired last year. It cost us, I think, in the vicinity of $1,700 to $1,800. We bought it at that time with the gauge wheels, which is an optional thing. I like it because it controls the height a little better. If you're in an area where your tractor makes a little dip, you don't have that action of digging in. The gauge wheel keeps it, floats it a little, gives a little bit of regulation and flotation over the top of the crop. I use them also to adjust the tension of the springs. Just by pulling out, by lifting this up, I can get more action on top of the crop just by raising and lowering the gauge wheels. The normal way to adjust these is by moving this spring back and forth in this bracket. And as you can see on this machine, that takes quite a while. So we use the gauge wheels. As a matter of fact, we use gauge wheels on pretty much all of our 3-point hitch cultivators. This is an updated version of an old Dearborn weeder which they used in the 30s, and how it works is that these tines will vibrate as it goes over the crop. I use the Lely specifically for drag off of potatoes up to certain growth stages on my leafy crops, and when crops get a lot larger, spinach 4 or 5 inches high, I won't use it anymore. I also use it in conjunction with my baskets a lot of times. The baskets will churn up in between the rows, and the action will break up the clods. It'll also mulch around the plants that way. So I use it not only as a separate tool, but often in conjunction with another tool. Our soil is very sandy, so this, in the land that is very sandy, this is well suited for shallow cultivation. And of course, we don't want to disturb much soil. One, either to turn up weeds, or two, to let any of the moisture out, especially on a year like this where it's so dry. So this is an ideal thing. You have to use it at least weekly. I'm pretty good about it, except during strawberry season. Things get ahead of us. But if you use it weekly, you can get crops out without even having to go through and hand hoe. So it's an important item on the smaller vegetables. This is a budding basket weeder that we use alone and in conjunction with the Lely weeder. Our beds are 60 inches from wheel track center to wheel track center. All my tractors are set up that way. And I can seed 3 rows of spinach, radishes, what have you, at 17 inches apart. So these are set up to do pretty much all the crops, as well as I can use this side dresser in conjunction with it to scuffle in, do the activity of the machine. I can scuffle in calcium nitrate, whatever I want to put on. These are a little different than some, and you'll notice the wires here are at an angle. I used to have just flat, straight wires across like that, but I put them on the edge because I put these angled wires on at the edge so I get a little more aggressive action on the edges of my bed. And I guess another thing to point out perhaps is that we use, I use one chain, I use a couple of chains on so that I get the driving action in the back. That rear set of baskets will, as you can see, turns a little faster than the front ones. This kind of dimples into the soil and roots out the plant, and that second line will come right behind and sort of kick it out under, and so it lays on top of the ground. So I understand that some growers will use these units without chains and run them over the top of the row, but right now I'm using it set up like this to kick weeds out, throw a little soil into the plant, and then by coming behind with the Lely, I can also kick a little more soil and whatever, break up any clods or small clods that are on top of the soil surface. The tractor speed that I use really depends upon the soil I'm in and how much soil I'm throwing around and how small the crop that I'm cultivating is. You're in beans and they're up pretty good. I'll clip along 4 to 6 miles an hour. Got out some newly transplanted lettuce and I want to go between it. I'm a little more tender with the joystick, I guess. This tractor, like the other Kubota, is an offset high-wheeled tractor, and with it came this set of sweeps and shanks, or a full set of sweeps and shanks. We use this, we have a couple of discs we use for hilling. We use this to go after weeds when they get out of control in crops like beans. As you can see, here's a red root pigweed. You can imagine he was a pretty good sized beast. And these shovels are good at doing just that. They bury, they root out. They're very, very aggressive. Although we use them to cultivate the edges of our plastic. On the front here, I have a half sweep, which is basically a sweep with one side cut right off, and I can get right up close to the plastic. I can side dress it at the same time, the edges, and I can also throw dirt in with the rear sweeps back on top of the fertilizer, all in one pass. So it's pretty versatile, even though it's quite a chunk of iron. But when things get that bad, this is the kind of heavy artillery you really want to have. These can be set up in many different configurations by taking these off, and as I say, I may take this sweep off and put a hiller and hill potatoes, getting the weeds farther out between the rows of potatoes. I used it in beans this morning, cultivating a crop of beans. I'll set this up differently inside with a side dresser on the other side and side dress and cultivate 2 rows of corn at a time. These shanks and sweeps are a little rough for doing the kind of work that we use the Lely with and the budding baskets. But for your larger crops, pumpkins, vine crops, things on plastic, beans, when they get up to after they get to about 3 or 4 inches, you can go in there and use this kind of tillage tool quite effectively. One of the things I like about the sweeps and shovels on doing beans or things you would have in a line on bare soil, whether it's peppers or if you're growing them on bare soil or small tomatoes. We grow our pumpkins and winter squash. One of those things that those sweeps do is they actually throw a little soil back on the plant, and this is pretty well demonstrated in this situation. The outer sweeps will kick out, roll over pigweeds. Stuff in the middle, it will actually hill in and throw soil on top of the weed. Here's some crabgrass that is covered up with soil. It's going to restrict the growth of that plant. This crabgrass will come along, obviously, but it's be set back a great deal more than the bean. And anything that's smaller than that will obviously be smothered. So you not only get the action of destroying the weeds in cases, but also smothering new growth under the canopy of the plant, which I like. If you notice up front here, there's a half sweep, which means that it doesn't have, I don't know if you can get a shot of it, but it doesn't have this half of the cultivator at all. That's a very handy tool to get up close to plants. We also use that in cultivating the edges of our plastic. Our tomatoes, our peppers, our melons, squash, cucumbers, eggplant, is all on black plastic, and when we put them out at transplant time, we cover them with hoops and remay. So at the time we take the remay off, we have an awful mess of crabgrass and broadleaves that's growing along the edge of the plastic and has also been nurtured in that environment along with a desired plant species. It's also got a lot of weeds in there to deal with. When we first started farming for several years, that just meant an interminable amount of hand labor, of hand weeding. And with this particular, not the way the machine's set up here, but now we cultivate, we take the remay off, and by taking these two chisels off, these two sweeps off, we move these half sweeps out, we reverse them so that the sweeps are out here just inside the tire tread, and we can go right down along those edges of the plastic, right underneath them, just barely. Sometimes it'll even throw the dirt off the plastic, but what it'll do is any of the weeds growing in that area will be flipped out and rolled over, almost in a plow-like fashion. And then behind, we have a set of duck feet cultivator that we put the pump point right on the center of the tire, and that will come right along and throw soil right on top of the weeds. So we can really minimize the cultivating of the edges of the plastic, which is a great, that's a great labor saver for us. And as far as the middle of the row, we seed that down to a cover crop of clover, so we don't have to cultivate out there. We were talking a few minutes ago about cultivating the edges of the plastic. Here's an example of some plastic that was just recently cultivated. We pulled the remay off over a week ago, and because it's strawberry season, we didn't get in here and cultivate immediately, which we should have. So yesterday I came in here and we were dealing with, you can see, some pretty large weeds here. And here again, despite the size and the thickness of the weeds on the edges, we were still able to that front shoe was able to chisel these things out. We were able to throw calcium nitrate in at the edge, and the rear sweep was able to come through and bury a lot of the weeds and cover a lot of the calcium nitrate in the edges of the plastic, and this is the end result.
Hi, I'm Gary Gemme from Harvest Farm in Whately, Massachusetts. I've got a wholesale vegetable farm with my partner Dave, and we specialize in certain brassicas, primarily collard greens and kale. We grow tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, some herbs, and greenhouse crops. We grow about 100 acres of crops. Most of it is brassicas. Cultivation is a big part of our weed control program. Herbicides are used as well as hand hoeing and cultivation using various different techniques and tools. We find that we can grow some of our crops with no herbicides and only cultivation, and other growing techniques with the brassicas, we find that we need to use a combination of herbicides and cultivation. In particularly weedy fields, we may have to get out and hand hoe, but what we're looking for in the long term is to clean up our fields and get them to a point where we reduce hand hoeing to a minimum. But when we have to seed crops directly into the field, we find that we need to use a pre-emergent herbicide usually just to get a jump on the seeds coming out of the ground. Before we get to whether we use cultivation or herbicides or both, really starts with the crop rotation. We have a 3-year rotation program here on the farm to try and keep diseases and weeds at bay. We find that it works quite well for diseases, but the weed pressure is always there. We're trying to do better and better all the time, but it seems like the weeds are getting tougher and tougher to deal with too. So we start with the rotation. That tells us where we can plant certain crops, certain families of crops, and we look then at the conditions, weed pressures in the different fields, and decide where to try to farm with no herbicides, where to farm with them, and what herbicides we may have to use, and basically our whole approach to farming those fields. So this tool here is the basis of our establishing a clean field from very early on. And this, combined with making a bed to get a smooth surface, gives us the capability of doing a good job to start with. Once we get a little bit of weed pressure and our transplants are still small enough, we run through with this cub tractor and the budding cages. We slide right in between the plants and do a nice job of cleaning everything up except what's in between the rows, or in the rows. And that serves us as our first cultivation, and after that we go in with a different tractor. We can do an acre in about a half an hour with this, and my goal is to always go as fast as I can. Speed seems to really make a big difference with this thing. If the plants are tall enough and the ground is firm enough, I've gone in road gear with it and really been pleased with the results. You also like to get your work done quickly, but you want to do a good job, and that's the primary goal. When we find conditions are particularly clumpy, such as after heavy rains, before we go in for the hilling, we will frequently go in with these small teeth with these little wires attached to them to break up the clods, so that when we hill, we don't throw the clods all over the plants and do more damage than good. These we found hanging around in an old barn, and put them to use. They work quite well for fracturing the soil. The key to doing a good job is to have a nice straight flat bed that the cultivators can follow to a T. This system works well enough that the tractor virtually does it itself. As a matter of fact, one time I was chased by some mean bees, and I jumped off the tractor, and it caught up to me at the end of the row, and it had cultivated perfectly all the way along without me on it. After we go through with the budding cultivators, we then leave the crop alone pretty much until it gets to a stage of growth where we can just sneak in one last time, and that's when we come in with this tractor with the big sweeps on it. And we adjust them. The cultivating shanks are adjustable so that the teeth are tipped down, not as they are now, but they're pointed more towards the ground. And we go through and hill them up and top dress them at the same time. Now, so far with the use of the buddings, we've achieved weed control in between the rows. Once we come in with these particular cultivators, we achieve weed control within the row because we hill up the dirt around the plants, and we can bury weeds up to about 2 inches in height. We do that just prior to the canopy filling in, and usually when we go in, we also add fertilizer to give the crop enough food to carry it to maturity.
I'm Tom Harlow. I'm the owner and operator of Kestrel Farm here. We bought this farm this past year. It's about 90 acres, certified organic. We are growing vegetables on about 50 acres of it. The rest of it is fallow or pasture. This is in Westminster, Vermont. It's wholesale, probably 85% of it. The other 15% is retailed through a farm stand that we are partners in with my brother, actually 2 brothers. This is a flame weeder that I used that Paul Harlow bought 5 or 6 years ago for about $5,000 to $6,000. It runs on vapor rather than liquid. It was custom made in Germany to fit the 4-foot wide beds that we were planting at that time. We use it for raised beds for carrots and parsnips mainly. It's used in carrots and parsnips on a stale seed bed, which gives us at least a 50% reduction in weeds that need to be hand pulled. We make a stale seed bed. About a week or 10 days later, we roll the top of the bed, then we plant. And just before emergence of the crop, we run the flamer over to kill small weeds of 1/4 to 1/2 inch in height. It works really well on broadleaf weeds. It does next to nothing on perennial weeds or grasses. Okay, this is a vapor system. Has 4 of these 20 to 25 pound tanks that go in this reservoir of water. This tank is a reservoir filled with water, which is heated by a small burner, which keeps the water warm and keeps these tanks from freezing, because we use the gas at such a high rate that these tanks would freeze up, and gas is no longer available if it freezes up. There are shutoffs on each tank. There is a shutoff inside the control panel, which shuts off the gas. There is an electronic shutoff for the burners and the pilot. 6 burners across this 4-foot space, producing, I don't know what kind of BTUs, but very hot. In dry conditions, I can travel at about 6 miles an hour, doing a very good job. If early in the morning, if the weeds are wet with dew, I usually shift down to about 4 miles per hour. The disadvantage to this machine is that it's set up for the 4-foot wide bed, and it's not adjustable. The burners are all attached rigidly. They can't be turned off. They can't be adjusted to different angles. So we're stuck with this 4-foot wide width. Since this was made, we've gone down to about a 2-foot wide bed, which means that we're using only using about half of the burners. Generally, this uses about $32 worth of gas per acre, which is $8 per tank, which is what it costs us to fill these up. Under dry conditions, we use a little less gas because we're traveling faster. In wet conditions, we use a little more gas because we have to travel at a slower speed. Okay, this is a roller that comes off of the back of a field cultivator. The brackets have been cut off, and we just mount it, mid-mount underneath this tractor. It's ground driven, rolls very freely. We use this in the initial preparation of a stale seed bed, subsoiling first, and then coming back with this roller to make a nice, smooth and level seed bed. And then about a week or 10 days later, we come back and hit the beds with this roller to kill any small weeds that have germinated just before we plant. Another very important thing to remember about tilling your stale seed bed with this is that you don't want to go so deep that you're bringing up new weed seeds. So we try to go no more than 2 inches deep with this. We also travel very fast to get a good stirring of the soil.
I'm Ray Mong, and this is Applefield Farm. We're in Stow, Massachusetts. We grow about 35 acres of organic vegetables and flowers. Pretty much everything that can grow around here, we do grow. And we have a lot of different techniques to kill weeds, and that's what we're going to be looking at today.
Weed control is an ongoing experiment a lot of the time. We have quite a few different strategies depending on the crop, because it's such a wide diversity of crop. It can't always be the same type of equipment or the same strategy, and nothing's ever perfect, and the weather's never quite right all the time, so things have to be adjusted. We don't try to get every single weed out of the fields. Between it probably being impossible for us anyways and cost prohibitive, I don't know, I have almost a feeling that weeds can almost be beneficial sometimes, either for shade or for host for beneficials as well as pests. I basically treat it like I do insects. I'll tolerate a fair amount of pressure if it's not affecting the crop. And, I've got a setup here, Bezzerides or Bezzerides, however it's said, that we've had for probably 4 or 5 years now. And for the most part, it works pretty well for us. We've got fairly bony ground, a lot of small, gravelly soil, and even some fairly good size pieces of gravel. So in the past, I had a Lilliston cultivator, and the first time I put it out in the soil, it clogged right up, and with some stones caught in the tines, and sold that for what I paid for it. So that was one experiment, and got a piece of equipment in that had some budding basket cultivators on it, and I knew right away that it wasn't going to work in my soil, so got rid of that. Initially we started out with just sweeps, and you could put, when the corn was small, just starting the first leaf coming out, going about as slow as the tractor could go, and the cultivator's close, and not trying to throw dirt at it, and you just go blind after a little while, just all that corn, just having to watch it so close and killing half of it. And what I like about the Bezzeride setup is that once you spend the time and get it set up right, it does take a little bit of a trial and error and getting things adjusted and leveled out right for the soil. But once you got it set up, your cultivation speed can be quite high. When the crop gets bigger, or on crops that don't mind being hilled, those spiders can be turned the opposite direction, and like a straight disc, they throw dirt in, but they don't throw it real heavy. They'll make a rather shallow hill, but they'll do a nice job hilling up and smothering weeds that way. So you can get in and do it a couple times without the hill getting too high to get at. Yeah, we use the Bezzeride setup for an awful lot of the crop on the farm, primarily corn, peas, beans in particular, but all the flowers. We do 20 different varieties of cut and dry flowers, and peppers if we grow them in dirt instead of plastic, which we do sometimes, and pumpkins, and we grow almost everything there is. So we use the Bezzerides for almost everything. We run the spiders mounted up front, so the spiders are going along, catching weeds, moving dirt. The way they're set up for the initial cultivations they're actually pulling dirt away from the crop, catching any weeds that are there, and then the spring hose, which are behind, are set up relatively close to the crop. They do a little bit of soil movement, and they'll also hill up some dirt in between the rows, so you're actually getting cultivation 100% through the row. You're not leaving a blind space down the row center, which every place else is easy to get. It's between the plants in the row. That's always the hard place to get the weeds. And I have found that the spider spring hose setup does that better than anything I've ever tried before, at a fairly decent rate of speed, which one row at a time, again, I think speed has got some advantages. There's a couple of adjustments we make. We carry the one wrench we need to do it with us on the tractor all the time. Other than the up and down, just to be sure you're riding in the dirt, the spiders themselves need to be adjusted in and out depending on the canopy of the crop. You don't want to be yanking out the crop, so when the crop, let's say corn, is very small, you run down and have them quite close together. As the corn gets larger and gets some leaf, you've got to move them apart. The other adjustment is we turn the spiders the other way to actually do some hilling for those crops that don't mind being hilled. With our corn strategy, real quick, is the initial thing is we rototill it to start with a clean seed bed, plant right away. 3, 4, 5 days, depending on the time of year and how quickly the corn germinates, we'll go in and run a Lely tine cultivator. It's a blind cultivation before the corn, well before the corn is even coming up through the ground. Like I say, I average about four days after we plant, just to try to keep the weeds from flushing up. Shortly after the corn comes through, like at spike stage or just after spike, we'll Lely blind cultivation one more time. And if the weather's been good and our timing is right and we didn't get caught up doing something else and lose track of the corn, we can get it to where the corn is up 4, 5, 6 inches tall, and the only weeds that are there are really itty-bitty, and you come through with the Bezzerides and do a little bit of hilling and stuff, and that corn can be real clean. And we may Bezzeride twice, maybe hill this. Again, it depends on the time of year, how quickly the corn is growing, whether it's early planted corn or late season corn. Last time through, we'll just put discs on and do a rather aggressive hilling, both to smother anything that still survived, also to help hold the corn up if we get a thunderstorm or whatever. It can make quite a difference. But corn, I'd say by the time we do that final hilling, it's probably yay high, just scraping underneath the belly of the tractor. What we try to do is 2 Lelys and I would say 2 Bezzeride through the field and then a disc hill. So it's probably 5 cultivations, 2 blind and 2 Bezzeride and 1 quick throw the dirt at it.
I heard about flame weeding a couple years ago from a fellow farmer, and I thought it sounded really intriguing, mainly because I love killing weeds, but also because it does a nice job in some problem areas that we have. Mostly, I use it for stale seed beds, and on certain crops, carrots, beets, slow germinating crops. And the other purpose, I'm trying to develop the right tools to build the right tool to do the edges of plastic and the walkways in between rows of plastic, which is a very difficult area to cultivate. You can hoe it and hoe it and hoe it, and you just keep doing that all year long. It's working out pretty well, although we have a really good crop of crabgrass and red purslane. It takes a lot of heat to kill it, and the crabgrass especially comes right back. The tall broadleaf weeds are easily killed. Pigweed, lamb's quarters, all of those weeds are easily taken care of, and just to alleviate those weeds for us has been a great help. Although I'd prefer if the crabgrass and the purslane didn't go to seed this year, I'm going to have to do some hand weeding in there, and hopefully in the future I'll put my plastic where there is no crabgrass or purslane. The 2 weeders I have are a tractor toolbar mounted one, which is used for the wide space in between the plastic, gets the bulk of it, the walkway, and this is quite a bit hotter because I'm running a 100-pound can. As you can see, it's a homemade tool. The other weeder is a backpack mounted one, and my theory on that is to get up close to the edges of the plastic. And it's a fine line between burning plastic and killing weeds. But with proper speed and the proper angle and the proper distance from the ground and the flame adjustment, it's effective. Not on grasses, but on those broadleaf weeds we talked about. I'm burning only vapor. I've tried to get into the liquid burning. My local propane company got really scared when I talked about that. They tried to help us out a little bit, but they didn't. Once they realized what I was doing and saw this setup, they took their tanks away. And so basically, if you're going to burn liquid, you're on your own. They'd be happy to come fill my vapor tanks anytime and sell me more fuel. But when you talk about liquid, I believe you're on your own because of the liability. Another thing this backpack weeder is really handy for are those little problem areas. It could be where your spacing was wrong on your transplanter, or your cultivator sweeps don't quite hit the very center of the walkway. There's an area like that here, and you can just walk and kill all those weeds without walking the rototiller or something slower or pulling them by hand. You can knock them down with this, and you can hit basically anywhere in your farm as easily as you can throw in a backpack and take a walk. It doesn't take that long. You got to get the weeds when they're small, though, like anything else. My toolbar mount flamer needs quite a bit of work. Mainly, it's not hot enough because I'm burning vapor. I'm extracting so much vapor at a time, I get ice up, so my flame cools down with time. And that's the big thing I've got to do, is go to a bigger tank and maybe use some smaller burners in a gang. The other big change needed on my toolbar flame weeder is the ground clearance problem. Once your crop gets big, the fire has to be so close to the ground, I'm knocking blossoms off of peppers and bending the tomato plants. So I'm going to put a yoke toolbar and hopefully get a 250 to 300 gallon saddle tank and give it a shot for next year.
Hi, I'm Jake Guest, and this is Kildeer Farm in Norwich, Vermont. We farm here, my wife and I, on about 40 acres, most of which actually is rented, but we have about 3 acres on the home farm and another 10 acres nearby, and we own about 12 miles away 24 acres, which we actually are presently leasing to someone else. My first experience, practical experience with flaming was this little device here. The idea is that I can apply flame to a bed, to anything, to a row. What I do is I go over, I actually go over the rows that are planted just before the seeds come up. And this thing is very useful for times when a crop, for instance, a crop that comes up much sooner than other crops, where I just don't, there's no point in going to get the tractor and putting the flamer on and doing the whole thing just for radishes or something that's quick. So all the beds are prepared ahead of time, and then I just take this flamer out just before the crop comes up and go along in the mark and flame the mark where the cedar mark. And it kills everything that's germinated, and the crop comes up right behind it. Sometimes it literally, as the crop is coming, is actually cracked the soil. And when I flame it, it's just, it's literally hours before it emerges. But when it comes up, there's no weeds available. There are no weeds left. The flaming is very effective on weeds that are newly emerged, small weeds that are just emerged. It's less effective when the weeds are a little bit bigger, 2 or 3 inches tall or so. Still works, but sometimes you have to go a little slower or use more heat. It's also not particularly effective on grasses, unfortunately, because any grasses or any weed that comes from deeper in the soil and not right on the surface doesn't get hit or can regrow. I found that the flatter the surface is of the stale seedbed, the better the flamer works. It's really important. If there's any ridges or lumpy soil, the weeds manage to, the flamer deflects off the lumps or the ridges. So I've experimented with different ways of preparing the beds, and flat is important. That works really well. I found that grasses are a real problem. The problem is that the growing tip of the grass is slightly below the surface, so the flamer goes over the top, kills the top, what's visible, and a few days later the grass reemerges. One way that I think I've dealt with the problem is to flame a little later where grass is a problem, because for some reason, at later time, the grass the growing tip has actually come out of the soil and is vulnerable, and I can hit it with the flame. The ideal way to use this technique is to prepare the beds way ahead of time, as many weeks even ahead of time. What I try to do is get an area all fertilized, ready to go, and all the beds actually physically made. Then I start at one side, and I have to plant some early crops early. I plant them and do the flaming, whatever flaming I can, and then flame ahead. I always flame a week or so ahead of the actual planting. For those beds which I'm not planning to plant for, say, 4 or 5 weeks, I may actually go do a tillage with a rotavator, a very light tillage with a rotavator, before I even get to the flaming, and then they're part of the sequence. I actually have some fields where I make it a cycle, and I start back in the beginning again, re-prepare the beds and start all over again. Spinach is a crop, for instance, where every week I plant 2 beds, and I always have flame the week before and flame right after the planting, and then have flamed a couple weeks for the beds yet to be planted and tilled 4 weeks ahead of time. There are actually four components to the flamer. There is the flame heads themselves. There's the frame. There's the tank, and then there's the regulating mechanisms. The regulator consists of a solenoid activated valve which simply turns the machine on or off. This tank, the tank is really important. It has to be, you can't just use a regular propane tank that you see standing around greenhouses. This has to be a motor fuel tank, and they're not so easy to get to locate. This was a used one we got pretty cheap, but they cost about new. They cost about $700. You know, as you can see, it holds about 40 gallons of fuel. I figure it takes about $19 to $20 an acre worth of fuel. This device uses liquid propane as opposed to gas, and that's very significant because one of the difficulties that some of the European burners have is that using gas means that they get too cold from the evaporation of all the gas. These burners are much different. They move the propane in a liquid form all the way down to the burners before it's actually burned, so that there's no supercooling of the lines. The expansion of the gas just before it burns all takes place right down at the bottom of the burners. Each burner is a 250,000 BTU burner, and that's it's pretty arbitrary what you need. It depends on the width of the bed. This seems to be sufficient for my uses. It covers a 52-inch bed quite nicely. Sometimes I use the burner for a single row crop, in which case I don't even use the outside two burners on the outside four burners. Only use the two inside ones and tilt them so that they direct the flame right down to a single row down below there. So it's very versatile. There's lots of different uses for it. This is a good example of what the flamer does. On my left here is a bed. These beds were prepared at the same time. The one on the right and the one on the left were prepared at the same time. They were tilled and then rolled and marked. I use this roller. You can see it just barely. There are marks. The 3 rows are marked out, and that's to guide my planter when I plant. I plant by hand with a push planter. And I flamed this bed about 3 days ago, and it looked identical to this bed over here. And as you can see, there are hardly any weeds left. Now there are new weeds emerging. What I will do now at this point is I'll plant the crop in this bed, and then wait a few days before the crop comes up and flame it again. That's going to get any weeds that germinate between now and the time I flame. It also will get rid of these few little ones. You can't even see them. They're tiny little weeds that have germinated since I flamed it last time. I think one of the few downsides to using this machine it concerns safety. There's a lot of energy in here, and it has the potential for being pretty dangerous. I think that it's especially important that all the valves are tight and that the pins are all in and everything. If this thing dropped off or something broke, it could be a real disaster. I think the flame weeder has a real place in our operation here. There are some improvements and there are some techniques that I need to work on, but I think it's not enough alone, but in conjunction with a proper and appropriate and timely tillage, I think it's indispensable. I find that I'm finding more and more uses for it every year, and I certainly am very encouraged by what I've discovered.